Hello fellow terrestrials, and welcome to another mystery video. My name is Flori and this is Sofitarot. Today we're diving into a quite sad and heartbreaking story, the case of Susan Wiley, also known as GENIE. For those who have never heard of her case is a very unfortunate case of isolation and torture that took place in the early 1950s. So if you're curious to know what happened to her, then keep watching. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe for weekly mystery videos and tarot readings. Give this video a like so you can support my new and growing channel, and you can also follow me on my social media. So now without further ado, let's get right into the video. The case of GENIE. We dive into a very quiet neighborhood in California, where behind closed doors a tragedy was unfolding. This is the story of GENIE, a girl whose life was a roller coaster ride through hell and back, a real-life drama that shook the world to its very core. Susan Wiley, also known as GENIE, was born in 1957. GENIE grew up in a family full of chaos and trouble, so as you can imagine, life was never easy for her. Her mom and her dad, Clark and Irene, had always had their dire secrets. Irene expressed how her life had ended the day of her wedding, how Clark never wanted any children at all. Despite this, they had not one, but 4 children. And the tragedy begins already with their firstborn child, a baby girl who died of pneumonia after being left in a garage for many hours, allegedly because Clark couldn't stand her shrieking. I mean, just imagine a baby being left in a garage floor for hours. They then had a baby boy whom also conveniently passed away, unfortunately, because of blood poisoning. So the third Wiley child is John, a boy who, despite being healthy, shows signs of neglect by his parents. He was a boy that, for his age, was developing way slower than other children. Back then, and because of all this neglecting and 2 of their children passing away, Irene had begun to notice that Clark, her husband, was indeed mentally unstable. So she tried sending John to his grandmother in an attempt for him to have a better life and so that she could raise him. But unfortunately, Clark's mother tragically passed away in a car accident, and John had no other choice but to go back to his parents. His mother's death was probably the last straw for Clark. This hit him so much to a mental level that he literally started to force his family to begin an isolation period from the outside world, and as a result, making Irene and John, both of them, his prisoners. This is when GENIE was born. After GENIE's birth, the very first thing that Clark did was claim that GENIE was mentally disabled. This is where the creepiest part of the story comes. Instead of searching medical support for his daughter, he decides that the best option is to isolate and lock GENIE up in a room so that she would never ever get out. So at the age of 20 months, GENIE began to be left isolated from society and locked up in a room in Wiley's family's house. I mean, what parent on earth would have such a twisted idea? Of course, GENIE's dad was totally paranoid, mostly of what other people would think about GENIE. He basically thought that GENIE would do nothing but bring shame to the family's name. So for 13 years, GENIE was confined to a very small room, tied up to a potty chair, where she was literally a prisoner of her father's cruelty and her family's secrets. In that suffocating space, she was denied the most basic human rights. The right of having a voice, the right of physical touch or any connection with other people. In fact, her father literally ordered her brother John and her mother Irene that whatever they did, they would never ever be allowed to talk to GENIE. Also, her mother Irene was blind with cataracts, so she really felt powerless in this situation. And as a matter of fact, she was really scared to disobey Clark. So again, so that you can imagine this room, reportedly, GENIE's dad had rigged up the windows with metal bars and had covered them with blankets to prevent any anyone else from seeing from the outside, or even hearing Ginny if she made any noise, which she usually didn't. As I said before, he would also use physical restraints, so when he didn't tie her to the potty chair, he would tie her to her rib. The most cruel thing was, in fact, that he even imposed really strict rules to Ginny. She was not allowed to make any noise at all, or express herself in any way, which often resulted in violence if she disobeyed. This cruel and dehumanizing treatment kept Jenny hidden from society and, as I said before, deprived her of the most basic human rights for a significant portion of her childhood. But now I must say, it was incredible even the way in which this family lived. The Wilsons family only had 2 rooms, which meant that all 3 of them had to sleep in one room, while Ginny was locked up in the other. The family did not even have any beds. Both parents would reportedly sleep on chairs, while John would sleep on the floor. Now, regarding Ginny's diet, she was mostly fed liquids and cereal by his brother John, who was forced to do this in complete silence so that Ginny would not have any contact with the outside world. It wasn't until 1970, when Ginny turned 13, that things took a turn for the better, and she finally got pulled out of the darkness. So the family was already messed up, but nobody in the neighborhood seemed to notice anything weird. So one day, Clark left the house, and this is when Irene finally sees her chance to escape from years and years of abuse and madness. Thanks to Irene's escape is when finally Clark Wiley began to be seen by authorities as quite suspicious. And it wasn't very long until Clark Wiley was finally arrested and Ginny was discovered by the authorities. And the story gets a little bit more disturbing. The very first day of his trial, Clark decided to take his life and shot himself to death. But this is not all. He left a note and $400 for his son, John, before doing this. When Ginny was rescued by the authorities, they could not believe that they had found this mere shell of a human being, weighing about 25 kilograms, unable to walk or speak, obviously did not understand the English language at all. Also, Ginny was clearly underdeveloped. I mean, she grew up in the darkness, which meant she never really had the need to adjust her eyes to the light or to long distances. Also, her motor abilities were close to none, and she would communicate herself with just grunts and noises. Now, Ginny's case caused quite a stir in the science world. It literally got researchers all fired up, sparking a ton of studies on how being cut off from society would mess with human growth. And I mean, there is really no wonder. A child that had been confined to a room for 13 years of her life without being talked to, without being touched, without being fed right. Psychologists saw her as a golden ticket at that time because studying Ginny meant unraveling the mysteries of our minds and emotions. And since Ginny and John were basically under the mandate of the state after Clark's death and Irene's hospitalization due to mental health, well, Ginny didn't really have a say deciding if she wanted to take part of these experiments or not. So it was simply agreed that Ginny would take part in these experiments about extreme social isolation. But yeah, I mean, the question is how ethical it is to put a girl who had faced so much abuse and torture under such scientific tests. In any case, over the years, Ginny embarked on a journey of healing, a wide ride full of upside downs. And with the help of dedicated therapists and caregivers, she started to find her way in this world, a world that felt totally alien to her. Ginny was taught language. The case of language learning in Ginny, it was a very big thing because of this critical period linguistic theory. So scientists would say that because she was way past her critical period, because she was 13 years old, it was almost impossible for her to learn language as a baby would do. But in any case, Ginny obviously was taught language, and she was accompanied by all sort of professionals so that she would have a chance to live a normal life. They also discovered that she could say a minimum of 5 words already. These would include no, Flori and mother, which there's no doubt that were words that were directly related to her horrible situation. Now, something really interesting is that she totally lacked emotion. She was not able to cry, and she could only express the feelings of anger and fear, but that was really about it. So in the very first month, Jenny already learned 100 words. She had to learn how to play. Also, she had to learn how to chew food, and obviously the basic things like going to the toilet and even dressing herself. And honestly, at this point, her caregivers had really the hope that Jenny would make a full recovery. Although, as I said before, with the critical period, grammar structures were mostly Jenny's problem. I mean, grammar in general was really not comprehensible for Jenny. And this about the grammar in Jenny really allowed scientists to conclude that the critical period for learning sentence structure is somewhere between 5 and 10 years old, for which Jenny was already a bit old. Still, Jenny was able to use language at a communicative level, so she could express herself and just tell her caregivers what she wanted and how she felt, just without a real structure in her sentences. So when Jenny finally turned 18, instead of wanting to find a foster family, Jenny really had the desire to go back to her old house and live with her mother, who was now outside of the hospital. Yeah, that same house where it all started. But unfortunately, her mother could not take it very long. And from that moment on, Jenny began to move from foster family to foster family. The caregivers and the professionals who had accompanied her through her healing process began to be worried for her, and mostly for her well-being. So they tried to intervene in a way so that they could make sure that Jenny would find a forever home, a forever family. But this is when her mother, Irene, started to claim that these professionals, these caregivers, were really very close to her. In my opinion, she was showing a little bit of jealousy that they were so close to her child and she was actually never able to be there for her. Those people who had helped her, who had cared for her, and who had showed her love and care were basically prohibited to talk to her or even see her again. But after all of this journey, after everything that happened to her, after starting to learn how to live in this society from zero, for being pulled out of the darkness and being given the chance for a second life, basically, GENIE WILEY still lives. She's 67 years old. She is at an adult care home in LA. Okay, guys, I really hope that you can take Jenny's story as a human legacy that proves how strong a human being can be, even under such complicated situations that we might have in life. I mean, if you take her example, our problems are basically reduced to nothing, literally. I personally feel like Jenny's journey is like a guiding light, if you know what I mean. Anyone who's gone through tough times, this story shows us that no matter how dark things might get, there's always a chance to turn things around. I mean, Jenny herself, even after she was born, and also one of the reasons why her father Clark decided to lock her up is because doctors had said that she would not make it to 12 years old. And she was found at 13 after being imprisoned and fed incorrectly and just being denied of her basic needs and rights as a human being. So someone who was literally diagnosed to die before her 13th birthday with a normal raising. How can you guys explain that Jenny actually survived 13 years, deprived of food, deprived of love, and deprived of interaction? There is a reason why we are brought to this world. I mean, there's no other way of explaining it. Like, even after all she went through, all the neglect, all the abuse, like, what are the odds that she survived? How strong does one have to be to overcome illness and pain under constant torture and abuse? Remember, it's all in here. We can literally heal ourselves if we wanted to. We are the ones that decide how our life is going to go. Like, we literally write the story of our lives. If you guys like this video, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like and a comment down below. Tell us what you thought and what you think about the story of Jenny. And you can also follow me on my social media. And I hope to see you in the next video. See you very soon. Bye bye.